Several former employees have claimed that your company was a hostile workplace for women. When you were confronted about it, you admitted making sexually suggestive remarks, saying, quote, "That's the way I grew up." One former female employee alleged that you said, quote, "I would do you in a second." Should Democrats expect better from their nominee?
Let me say a couple things, and if I can have my full minute and a quarter, thank you.
Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and just a quick follow-up on my last video. Yes, I am currently experiencing a bout of shingles, so if I look a little more haggard than usual, that is why. And just to answer one question without getting into the whole debate on the subject, I was actually not vaccinated for chickenpox as a kid. I had chickenpox as a kid. I still have some of the scars to show for it. And I mistakenly thought that having had chickenpox as a kid would make you immune from shingles as an adult, but it's the exact opposite. Something like 1 in 3 adults who had chickenpox as a kid will get shingles later on in life. And just to answer another question so it doesn't have to be a recurring theme in the comment section, I'm doing fine, albeit in a little bit of discomfort. Now, Marion, my wife, in all her wisdom, said that I absolutely cannot share pictures of my body on the internet. Nobody wants to see that. But she did not say that I could not describe what I feel like and look like through the power of movie metaphors.
Pizza the Hut!
Alright, and now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's get to the issue at hand, that being Micheal Bloomberg's performance during one of the most recent Democrat presidential debates. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. I am just going to post the highlight of highlights for the purposes of this vlog. And just so that Vox does not accuse me of doctoring a video, fair warning, this video has been edited for comedic purposes.
Several former employees have claimed that your company was a hostile workplace for women. When you were confronted about it, you admitted making sexually suggestive remarks, saying, quote, "That's the way I grew up." In a lawsuit in the 1990s, according to the Washington Post, one former female employee alleged that you said, quote, "I would do you in a second." Should Democrats expect better from their nominee?
Let me say a couple things, and if I can have my full minute and a quarter, thank you. I am very proud of the fact that about 2 weeks ago, we were awarded, we were voted the the best place to work, second best place in America. If that doesn't say something about our employees and how happy they are, I don't know what does.
And I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is that?
Let me finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me put, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet, and that's up to them. They signed those agreements, and we'll live with it.
So wait, when you say it is up to, I just want to be clear. Some is how many? And when you say they signed them, and they wanted them, if they wish now to speak out and tell their side of the story about what it is they allege, that's now okay with you? You're releasing them on television tonight?
Senator? No.
Is that right?
Senator, the company and somebody else, in this case, a man or a woman, or could be more than that, they decided when they made an agreement that they wanted to keep it quiet for everybody's interest. They signed the agreements, and that's what we're going to live with.
I'm sorry. No, the question is, are the women bound by being muzzled by you? And you could release them from that immediately, because understand, this is not just a question of the mayor's character. This is also a question about electability.
Now, love her or hate her, but Elizabeth Warren just scored some serious points, but some serious points with a but, and we'll get to it later. In watching this moment, everybody really has to appreciate that a presidential debate really is analogous to a cross-examination in a legal process. In prepping for a cross-examination, you have to take for granted that opposing counsel is going to ask you the hardest and most uncomfortable questions you can possibly imagine. You cannot walk into a cross-examination banking on the incompetence or ill preparation of the cross-examining attorney. You have to prepare to answer questions on your dirtiest and darkest of secrets as though opposing counsel knows them better than you do. And so watching Micheal Bloomberg flub around and hem and haw on questions that he really ought to have known were coming illustrates a very serious lack of preparation, in my humble opinion. And let me just preface this next remark with a joke. Why don't sharks eat lawyers? Professional courtesy. And like a shark that smells blood, Elizabeth Warren pounces on an injured Bloomberg. Bloomberg had to have known, or at least anticipated with relative certainty, that he was going to face questions on past accusations of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment. He had to have known that he was going to face questions on NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that he had asked previous employees to sign. He had to have known this. So to totally flub the answer and actually get defensive and accuse the moderator of not giving him enough time to answer the question.
Let me say a couple things, and if I can have my full minute and a quarter, thank you.
It's totally unacceptable. What should his prepared and reflexive answer to accusations of lewd comments in the past have been? I'm not saying that one should agree or disagree with the answer or even accept the answer, but the obvious answer for Micheal Bloomberg is, I lived in a different era back then, sensitivities were different, we did and said things then that were not deemed to be as culturally unacceptable as they are today. That's the answer, not, would you let me answer the question and give me my full minute and a half? And then in response to Elizabeth Warren's attack on the NDAs, he should have had an answer ready. And before I get into that, just to describe a little bit of what NDAs are, they stand for non-disclosure agreements. And depending on the context, they can take on very different forms. You have your commercial NDAs, which are if somebody wants to share an idea with a potential partner, but they don't want that potential partner stealing the idea, they make that potential partner sign an NDA, which would stipulate that that party has to hold all of the information in confidence, and if an agreement does not materialize between the parties, that other person cannot share or disclose any of that information that they acquired in the context of that feeling out for a business relationship. In the context of employment contracts, you have NDAs to the effect that the employee is going to learn things in the context of their employment that they cannot disclose during or after their employment with that company. But in this particular context, we are talking about NDAs in the context of settlement agreements. And in that context, these NDAs are most likely just confidentiality agreements as to the terms of the settlement between the parties. And here's the thing, as would have been my response to Elizabeth Warren's attack on the subject, NDAs are not there only to protect one of the parties. Typically, they're there to protect both of the parties. And it's very easy to understand how the NDAs are intended to protect both of the parties depending on the circumstances. Take the most obvious example, the quantum of the settlement. It's not necessarily the case that the accuser is going to want the general public knowing how much they got paid in the settlement. You might look at someone a little differently if you know that they settled for $20 million as a result of a lewd joke that was made to them at a Christmas party in 1995. You might look at someone differently just by virtue of the amount they got paid. If all of a sudden the general public knows that the accuser got paid tens of millions of dollars in a settlement, that might change the accuser's life and not in a good way. And keeping the quantum of the settlement confidential doesn't necessarily only protect the accuser, it also protects the company. If the company paid out a lot in the settlement, they obviously don't want that information becoming public and setting the precedent for all lawsuits going forward. If the general public finds out that a former employee got paid tens of millions of dollars for a dirty joke 20 years ago, you might see the birth of a lot of lawsuits against that particular company by former employees. But the quantum of the settlement is not necessarily the only thing that both parties might want to keep confidential by way of an NDA. Oftentimes, the NDA will include recitals of the allegations of the lawsuit or the allegations of the accusations. They might include medical and psychological information that the accuser might want to keep confidential. So NDAs, by their very nature, don't only protect one of the parties. They don't necessarily only protect the stronger parties. Sometimes they are in fact intended to protect the weaker of the parties. And if Micheal Bloomberg were well prepared for this line of questioning, which he should have been, this would have been his answer. It's also not really a realistic proposal that the parties can be released from certain aspects of the NDAs, but not others. Elizabeth Warren seems to be suggesting that Micheal Bloomberg ought to release the accusers from the NDAs, at least as relates to the allegations they made against Bloomberg's companies. Basically saying, let's hear what you accuse the company of without allowing the company to disclose what their defense was. And one does not need to be a highly experienced jurist to understand why that might be patently unfair. You can easily imagine circumstances where there might be highly relevant answers to the accusations that the accusers might not necessarily want to become public. Typically, parties sign NDAs to avoid litigation, to avoid having all of their dirty laundry aired before the public. They sign NDAs to avoid trial by public opinion. So Elizabeth Warren cloaking her demand that Micheal Bloomberg release the accusers from their NDAs under the guise of political benevolence or social justice, it's somewhat disingenuous or at the very least oversimplified to begin with. But wait, there's more! While we're on the discussion of NDAs, why don't we talk about all of the congressional NDAs to hide congressional misconduct? It is a lesser known fact that there's in fact a settlement fund in Congress to pay off settlements of accusations of sexual or behavioral misconduct. And guess who funds that settlement fund? You do, the taxpayers. And apparently since 1997, when the settlement fund was set up, over $17 million has been paid out by way of settlements. And guess what? In the context of those settlements for sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and other behavioral misconduct, there were NDAs that were signed between the parties. And what is good for the goose is good for the gander, and if Elizabeth Warren wants to pressure Micheal Bloomberg to release the parties from their NDAs, let's have Congress release all of the parties from their NDAs. I guess the major material difference would be that Michael Bloomberg's companies are in fact private companies, whereas the Congressional Settlement Fund is set up with taxpayer dollars, so there's an even greater need for transparency. That said, everything I just said about NDAs not necessarily protecting only one of the parties, but oftentimes both of the parties, holds true of the NDAs signed in the context of congressional settlements. Incidentally, something that people should consider before being outraged by the fact that taxpayer dollars are used to settle accusations of sexual or behavioral misconduct in Congress. In one sense, it does make sense because Congress people are nonetheless employees to some extent of the state. And if they were to be held personally liable for all accusations, it would certainly deter people from running for office. Now, there is in fact a very sensible argument that politicians should be held personally liable when there has been in fact a case of bona fide misconduct. And there would also be a very sensible argument that they should not be held personally liable if the accusation was frivolous. The only issue with that distinction is that it would require a determination on the merits. And when there has been a settlement, there has been no determination on the merits as to the validity of the accusations. And if everybody wanted each and every accusation to get to a judgment on the merits, then people would be complaining about the cost and waste of money in taking every accusation to a trial on the merits. The bottom line in all of this is that heading into a presidential debate, you have to treat it like a cross-examination by the most aggressive and vicious attorneys. I don't know if Bloomberg thought this was going to be like a discussion among friends and was not expecting to get these questions. But he should have prepared for them, and he was not prepared for them. And as far as Elizabeth Warren's attack goes, she's definitely going to score some political points for it, but if I were Michael Bloomberg, I would have reminded her, NDAs are not there to protect only one of the parties. And you can't cherry pick what elements of an NDA you want to disclose because they might be intimately related to other facts that would also need to be disclosed. That being said, the optics of having actually signed NDAs, which by Michael Bloomberg's own admission related to dirty jokes that some people might not have appreciated, are not good. The flip side to that is that Bloomberg employed something like 19,000 people as of 2018. And anybody who has ever run their own business or hired employees knows with certainty that when you employ 19,000 people, there are going to be problems. Actually, if Bloomberg wanted to spin this, although it's arguable how well received this spin would be, he might say something to the effect that if I employ 20,000 people and the only skeletons I have in my closet are 3 NDAs, I'd say I'm doing pretty darn well. Alright, and that is that. I hope you now appreciate the nuances of the NDA and what you have to do to prepare to go into battle. Bloomberg was ill-prepared and Elizabeth Warren pounced. And if you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when I put up a video. Drop a comment in the comment section below because it helps feed the algorithm. If you want some merch, all the merch links are in the pinned comment with a PayPal option for anybody who prefers that. And now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah!